So California is a rich state, is a liberal state, so typically a blue state, which makes it a good place to impose climate legislation. So there are good examples of how they have done it and how they have actually accomplished the goals. Okay, so car and light truck emissions are regulated by EPA in the US. But because of these smog problems in Southern California going back to the 1940s, California has negotiated a unique position under the Federal Clean Air Act, and it can set its own more stringent standards, but it has to get a waiver from EPA. And as you can expect, George W. Bush, who was a president before Obama, actually rejected the waiver request, whereas as Obama came in, Democrat, tried to do a lot of climate-friendly things, quickly approved the waiver. But the history of climate action goes back further. The major policy legislation in California with the key provisions and the bill designation versus the years. So from 2000, California established Climate Action Registry to enable polluters to report their emission. So this is kind of the beginning of the cap and trade kind of systems. Or constraints. 2002 Assembly Bill 1493, or the Powley Bill, which required the California Air Resource Board to adopt regulations that achieve maximum feasible and cost-effective reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from cars and light trucks. Senate Bill 2078, electricity sales, Assembly Bill 32, which was the first California Global Warming Solution Act of 2006, set targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by 2020, required California Air Resource Board to develop a plan to achieve that target, and authorized the use of cap and trade. Remember, cap and trade, we will see again, is basically where a high emitter can exchange their emission for permit from another person for a price. Okay, market-based solutions, which have some issues, as we will see. So that's the history of climate action well before the US or even many of the countries around the world. Okay, surprisingly, this was signed by Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was a Republican governor who are generally not so climate friendly. So in California, I think maybe even Davis was a Republican. Republicans have been going along with the mandate by the people of California to be climate friendly. Senate Bill 2375, Sustainable Communities and Climate Protection Act, required CARB to develop regional targets for greenhouse gas emissions and required regional agencies to develop integrated land use and transportation plans to achieve those targets. As we said, land use is controlled by local powers, local authorities, and that's why this regional enforcement is required. The Senate Bill 2IX, 2-9, increased renewables portfolio standard to 33% by 2020. We are sitting here right now, and it turns out California meets lots of its, has already met some of its AB 32 goals, for example. SB 535 from 2012 required at least 25% of the cap and trade revenue in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund to be spent on projects that benefit the disadvantaged communities. So that's a good idea. Collect money, revenues from cap and trade, market-based method to achieve climate goals, but use that income to improve regions where the disadvantaged communities live because of the disparities involved. They have continued this now. 2015, 2016, they set the target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. So now they are beginning to go for future emissions, and maybe even so here 2018, increase renewable portfolios standard to 60% by 2030, and has set a goal of zero carbon retail electricity by 2045. So pretty ambitious goals, especially compared to the US federal government or other states, but Northeast and New York are also pretty progressive. Okay. So this is Fran Paoli, State Assembly member and Senator Fran Paoli, authored several key pieces of climate legislation in California. So the Paoli bill has been very effective and popular. Promoting low carbon fuels, the LCFS, low carbon fuel standard, is a good example of one of the hybrid policies pursued by the California Air Resource Board to achieve AB 32 Assembly Bill 32 goal. Hybrid means that LCFS combines regulations with market mechanisms to achieve its goal of reducing carbon intensity of transportation fuels. We've talked before that just science, just technology transformation, just market forces will not meet the climate targets. So this is a good example of mixing regulations and constraints with market-based solutions. Okay, initial LCFS regulation adopted by CARB in 2009 required a 10% reduction in GHG intensity of transport fuels by 2020. In 2018, the program was extended with a target of 20% reduction by 2030. So already extended into the future. So market mechanisms allow the targets to be met at lower cost with increased flexibility. Okay, so LCFS factors in the full life cycle emissions of different fuels. This is this is important because it's not just about you bought the fuel from somewhere and you're only going to worry about your emission after you bought it. Actually, the accounting includes emissions from oil extraction and refining, from combustion burning of the fuel in a motorcycle, and from growing raw materials for biofuels. For example, oil from Canadian tar sands, one of the ugliest fossil fuels, has a higher carbon intensity than conventional crude oil, while biofuels such as ethanol tend to have a lower carbon intensity, as does electricity. Okay, so it's kind of a life cycle calculation where you start from the beginning of where it's being mined, produced, refined, burned off, transported, and used at the end point. That's the real way to do it. Okay, there are still tricks because California is a service economy, as we will see, not much manufacturing going on there, which means everything they use is produced elsewhere, so the emission has happened elsewhere. So how do you account for that? You can say Californians are very climate friendly and emit less compared to other states, but if other states are producing things that are consumed by Californians, then the accounting is not complete, right? So we have to be aware of those kind of situations in any case for everybody.